Awesome. Well, let's just go ahead and get into it, everyone. We have an hour together from what I see here. Last time we had like 45 minutes and I was just like, oh my gosh, how do I amplify everyone's voices in 45 minutes? But we got 60 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and do this. So yeah, we'll just go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. We are in the panel, which is titled Podcasting for Social Impact, Voices That Make a Difference. And I am just super excited to be featuring some incredible women today. And yeah, we're just going to kind of dive into it. I had a chance to talk to a couple of these women offline already. So I know a little backstory to everyone, but let's see, where do I go? This is like not podcasting. So obviously this is all live. I'm like, oh, I can't have my editor clean this out. So I'm just going to have to like fail forward. But just a little bit about me, everyone. My name is Jen Amos. I'm an award-winning podcaster. In the last 2 years, I've been able to do over 500 interviews across the board of being able to talk to military families, women, entrepreneurs, and anyone that just wants to talk about mental health. Because I think in a time since 2020, that has been a primary focus for a lot of us to take care of ourselves and to take care of our loved ones and say, get help. It's very important. And so if you all just want to learn a little bit about me, I'll go ahead and put this in the chat. But my website is jenamoscreates.com. So I'll go ahead and put that in later. And yeah, that's it. I was at the panel for the last Amplifying Her Voice event, the inaugural one, I think about a month ago. And I was fortunate to come back as a moderator to be able to talk to all of you incredible women today. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our guest here for today. Actually, one more thing I want to mention is in being able to talk about everyone individually via email or even in our Zoom chat before we got started, one thing that I admire about all these women is just their desire to amplify their voice and to cause a ripple effect to encourage other people to amplify their voices as well, or even just be the voice for the voiceless. And so all these women are incredible. Please, when you do watch this, even the replay, to check them all out. But yeah, without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce everyone one by one. We have Ami Tucker, who is the podcast host and producer of Tuckered Out. And she also is a lawyer, a writer, a DJ, and a mama. And if you want to get a hold of her, she does have an Instagram account, Tuckered Out Podcast. So real quickly, Ami, welcome to the show.
Unmute myself. It's not a podcast. You're right. I'm like, whoa.
I know it feels like I'm treating it like a podcast since we're all podcasters, but welcome to the show, right?
Hey, thank you. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quickly about you, Ami, I'm excited to have you speak because you like to represent the South Asian diaspora. And for me, as a brown Asian woman myself, one of my podcast shows, the Filipino American Woman Project, is really about talking about the Filipino diaspora and how, coming from a third world country, such as my mom and my dad, they left the country to give someone such as myself, an American-born child, to have more opportunities. And so I'm just really excited to engage with you today, and you really represent the South Asian diaspora.
Right. That's why I started the podcast. I mean, there's a lot of reasons I started the podcast, but I went down the South Asian route because obviously my parents have the South Asian immigrant story coming to the U.S. in the 60s. Every community I've lived in 9 cities now in 3 countries.
Wow.
I've been part of a South Asian community, whether that's in the US, I've lived in India, I lived in Dubai. And it's obviously a big part of who I am. And I started realizing the South Asian immigrant story, the diaspora around the world. I started just seeing a lot of common threads and themes. And I just really wanted to hear people's stories about their parents' immigration story, about how it was for them growing up South Asian and in the communities they were in, because some people grew up in the UK and people grew up in like Arkansas, or people growing up in, everyone has obviously different experiences, but I found common threads within these stories. And it's just been really cool to talk to so many amazing South Asian people.
Yeah. And I think what's really exciting is, when I think about even my parents' immigrant story, they weren't thinking about sharing their story. They were thinking about providing. They were thinking about creating these opportunities. And I think the gift for us being, let's say, American born in this instance for me is being that voice for them and honoring them. And so it's great that you are being the voice for them.
Yeah, I think, like you said, our parents didn't have the bandwidth to even think about sharing their story. That wasn't even part of what their day to day. It was like making it, surviving it, making it better for their kids. And so we are very lucky that we get to learn from them, and then we also get the opportunity to tell their story and our story. And so it's it's a really cool position to be in. I love it.
Yeah, no, it's a very cool position. Thank you, Ami, for sharing that. On that note, I actually want to go ahead and introduce Vanessa Graves, because she kind of is at a similar thread for us as well in regards to featuring, the story of our immigrant parents. And so Vanessa Graves, real briefly, her podcast show, and just give me 1 second, I want to make sure I pronounce this correctly. It's Ia de tu Madre podcast. Did I get that right, Vanessa?
Yeah, you're good.
I tried my best. I listened to your podcast and I tried my best, but obviously you can explain it for us. But if you all want to check her out, she does have an Instagram account, which I will go ahead and put in the chat. But Vanessa, I know that it also is very important for you, especially to amplify the voice of our mothers and their strengths. So welcome to the show, and a quick introduction, if you want to say a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So my podcast is called Hija de tu Madre podcast, and it is a word that we very much use in the Latinx community. So it means daughter of your mother as it translates, but my podcast is based on our Madre's immigration stories. So the immigration stories of our mothers, and then just discussing the topic of immigration, highlighting the topic, and also being able to talk to, these stories are actually being told by the first generation daughters. So we discuss the topic of immigration, our upbringing in the United States, and just some of the struggles that we have. And then also just kind of wanting to uplift the representation of the Latin community, and being able to just see ourselves, out there. So my podcast is kind of, just making sure that we're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recall from our conversation, as a mother yourself, it must be very interesting now to be a mother and to raise your kids. And you're kind of thinking like, oh, maybe that's why my mom did what she did.
Absolutely. And just seeing, the strength that she had through it all, and me being able to amplify the voice that she didn't have the opportunity to have, and just being there for her and making sure that we're telling those stories, because in my eyes, I don't think that's something that should be ashamed of. It's something that we need to be able to uplift and discuss. And they're beautiful stories and strong stories. And that is what being a mother is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Vanessa, it's so great to have you as part of our conversation today. Thank you so much for being here. And I'll go ahead and put in the chat Vanessa's Instagram if you want to go ahead and get a hold of her. As soon as I get other people talking, I'm going to go ahead and manage the chat here. But let me go ahead now and bring on Julie Neal, who is amazing life and leadership coach, community builder, writer, mom of two, high energy boys, as well as a founder of Mother's Quest and host of Mother's Quest podcast. Julie, welcome to the show.
Me unmute. Hello. Thank you, Jen. I'm so honored to be here, and I'm already inspired being able to listen to the stories of those of you who have shared about your journey and your podcast. So I can't wait to go check your podcast out after this.
Yeah. And Julie, it's great to have you. So you started podcasting back in 2016. And really what inspired you to start sharing your voice and speak up was the Charlottesville rally back in, I think, 2017. With sharing what you want to share, tell us about how important that time was for you to be like, I got to start speaking up.
Yeah. So as you said, I actually started the podcast in 2016. Mm-hmm. And it happened to be that I launched the podcast right before President Trump was being inaugurated. And so my podcast has grown up alongside the Trump administration. And I think, like so many white women during that time, we were coming into a sense that we needed to use our voice. We were coming into a sense that we needed to step into more responsibility and activism. And so when I first conceived of the podcast, I was not anticipating that it was going to be such a form of social impact. Mm-hmm. I think just my own journey and what was happening in our country at the time led that aspect of the podcast to continue to grow and evolve as I grew and evolved. And a very key turning point for me, as you mentioned, was the Charlottesville rally. Mm-hmm. I would say prior to that, I had started to have some conversations on the podcast already that were maybe out of my typical comfort zone. But the day of the Charlottesville rally, I actually it was the morning after, I woke up and I had this idea for something I was calling the Women Podcasters in Solidarity Initiative. And it was more of a formal commitment to say, I am going to use my podcast and my platform to shine a light on social justice issues, and had this belief that if I could say yes, then maybe I could invite other women podcasters also to say yes. And I had been sitting on that idea. Like, I think I was nervous about it. I think I was afraid maybe I'd say the wrong thing, or maybe I could do harm with some of those conversations. But after the Charlottesville rally, I woke up and I realized that there was no excuse to continue to stay silent, and that I had a real responsibility to step in to do that.
Yeah. And, Julie, one thing I appreciate about you that we talked about, prior to this discussion is that one thing you realize for yourself is that whatever discomfort you're feeling is so minimal to the real harm and real fear that, let's say, mothers that are women of color face. And so I just want to commend you for kind of stepping beyond that to be able to show up and have these conversations with women from all walks of life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the beauty of podcasting, is that we can learn so much in conversation. So the first person I brought on the podcast after that initiative was a woman named Nicole Lee, who's a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert. And she really invited me to hold a growth mindset, not only for how I showed up in activism and in conversations about race and other things in my life, but how I could do that on the podcast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Julie, again, it's a pleasure having you on here. Thank you for being part of our conversation today.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah. And of course, we are not done. We have more guests on the show. Let me go ahead and introduce Tamina Watson, who is an immigration lawyer, author, podcaster, and activist. You can reach out to her at info@watsonimmigrationlaw.com or Twitter as well, which will be included in the chat here shortly. Tamina, you love talking about immigration. So tell us about it. What is it about immigration that you love talking about so much?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here, and it's such an honor to be with all of you. And Julie, your story really touches me, because the last 4 years as an immigration attorney has definitely been a challenge. Why do I like talking about immigration? I didn't intend to be an immigration lawyer. I always wanted to be a lawyer, but not immigration. And when I actually emigrated from the UK to the US, I sort of fell into it by accident. And I went into it kicking and screaming. But as soon as I started practicing it, I realized it's my vocation. And the universe kept throwing it at me until I succumbed. And so it's been a really rewarding journey to be able to help other people who actually want to come to America and really want to build their lives, or even American businesses or who are looking for talent from different countries. So essentially, I'm helping businesses, investors, individuals navigate the complexities of immigration law. But what I learned as I started my own law firm in 2009 is that it's so opaque that even the simplest things are very difficult to understand. So I started to write about immigration. How do you become a citizen? And things. And as I was writing, a local station had just opened, a South Asian station, and they approached me to have a show. And I'm like, oh, I'm just an immigration lawyer. Who does a show? And they twisted my arm. And from 2015 to 2017, every week at 10 o'clock on Tuesdays, I had a live show. And after the first one, I was so hooked. I did not know what they meant when they said, Tamina, you're going to get hooked. I just became addicted to radio. And I didn't realize how big a platform it was until I started it. I could call anyone and say, hey, would you like an interview? And that's when I really understood the word platform. And I also understood how much an impact this type of broadcasting can make. So immigration reform has always been an issue that I've been wanting to, I have advocated for. And on top of that, the very niche issues that I have been advocating for are a visa category for startup founders, as well as a few other things. And the station sadly closed in 2017, and then I quickly turned it into a podcast. And what happened with podcasting, as you all may know, often you have to go to a studio or book time, and all of that became a rather big hassle for me. And COVID allowed that to subside. Can you hear an echo?
Yeah, just a little echo there, but we can hear you.
Good. I'll put my headset on after this.
Okay.
And so basically, I started to do these podcasts at home, just like we're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
And that started, I continued, it just wasn't as frequent. And now I'm just doing series after series. So I did my first series, October to December, which was really about preparing for a potential second term of another presidency like that, and how did lawyers really step up? What do we need to learn from the lawyers? And that turned into a book, actually. And so I love talking about it because it's important to share knowledge that is so deep and broad with people who are affected by it in ways they just don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And then because it's been so prominently broadcast in our news in every single way, the information is absolutely pertinent for the lay person. And so I love talking about it. I love writing about it. I have a bi-weekly column. And actually, as of today, I have another column in Entrepreneur Magazine. And so I'm very, very excited about the various ways I can get information out there.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Tamina, for sharing that and for being part of our conversation today. I know you have your book right there above your shoulder, which is titled Legal Heroes in the Trump Era, Be Inspired, Expand Your Impact, and Change the World. And so I think it's safe to say that we all were greatly impacted by the Trump era. And I'll just leave it at that. But thank you, Tamina, for being part of our conversation today. And last but not least, I have to introduce Allison Sutter, who is a mom of 3 girls, teacher, author, and spiritual mentor, as well as CEO of Living 360. She also is the host of Accelerate Your Mojo podcast. And you can find her on Instagram at Allison Sutter 3, and also on Clubhouse, where she has a room called Intuition, Your Everyday Superpower, which airs on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Central Time. So Allison, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. What a great panel of women.
Yeah, I know. We're just going to have a great conversation today. And I know for you, when it comes to podcasting, Allison, you like what it does for one's own self-image, and not just for sharing your voice, but even like hearing your own truth. So tell us a little bit about that, because I know that's something important you wanted to share to, possibly encourage other people to start podcasting themselves.
Well, what I think is interesting is when you start podcasting and you're doing your own editing and you're doing your own, curating of this message and this voice, you really get in tune with your own truth, your message, reflecting yourself to yourself. And what I was listening to you talk about everybody just now made me think of the fact that podcasting is really amplifying that inner voice too. It builds confidence when you get to listen to your own story and the stories of others. And it's really, there's this inner dialogue and I think it's a positive amplification of the inner voice as well as the external voice, with your guests, the stories they're telling. I think it's just a fabulous way to, accentuate everything that's good about the voice. And the other thing that I like too is that with the podcast, you're not distracted by the video. I really, really love just listening. It provides a space to just listen. It's so cool to just not be distracted by the video and all this going on. And you just, connect with that person and you're there.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you. Just being able to sort of multitask and have the, podcast in the background. I often hear when people listen to my podcast shows, they'll say, oh, it's like having friends without making the investment to make friends. I can listen in on a conversation of sorts. And so, Allison, it's great to have you here. So thank you for being part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I go ahead and dive into my next set of questions, I know that you all had a chance to hear each other's stories. So I want to take a minute here to see if anyone just had any general thoughts they wanted to comment on anyone so far. If you do, just go ahead and unmute yourself and share your thoughts. Going once? No, it's good. If not, we can go to the next question. Just give me a thumbs up and then we can go to the next question if you guys are good. Yeah? Okay, cool. Well, going back to you, Umi Tucker, is that correct?
Me.
I keep writing. Okay. Thank you, editor. Ami.
It's 3 letters, and I've gotten everything but Ami my whole life. So,
well, I totally understand what that's like. I mean, even though for me, my name is Jennifer, I don't know why people call me Jessica sometimes. So Ami, I just want to kind of throw myself in there and be like, yes, I've had my name mispronounced, even though it wasn't even pronounced correctly to begin with. Jessica is not Jennifer, but Ami, thank you for correcting me. It's very helpful. And I know that with, hopefully with the editors, they'll clean this up for the final product. But Ami, I want to talk about one of your favorite podcast episodes that you have on your show. And once again, to our listeners here or who's viewing this, Ami's podcast show is Tuckered Out Podcast. And you talk about, there's a podcast that you really enjoy, being able to talk about the farmers' protests in India, as well as, someone who's part of the board member of the Sikh Coalition, as well as the ACLU. Tell us a little bit about this episode and, how much it impacted you and why your listeners can go ahead and check it out and listen to it.
Yeah. I mean, besides it being one of the most downloaded episodes I've had, one of the reasons I love doing this podcast is because I'm getting to reconnect with old friends and I'm talking to friends, like we're having a chat and recording it. And I have a lot of South Asian friends that are doing amazing things. So for this particular episode, one of my good friends from UT, I'm a Longhorn. She is very involved with the Sikh community. She's on the board. Obviously, the farmers' protest in India was, and still, ongoing, was a major issue. It affected millions and millions of people. Obviously, I'm Indian background, but I've also lived in India as well for 5 years. So I have a very deep connection to the country. And as I was, recording episodes of my podcast, I realized I didn't just want to report on South Asians in the US. I wanted to also understand what's going on in my home country. And so we got together and I was like, let's talk about this. She's been very involved in the community. And I was just able to get, obviously the news was saying one thing, the media in India was saying one thing. I was just able to get another point of view on what was going on from an Indian American who understands, the way Indian Americans think here, but also is very engaged with the Sikh community. It was just a very powerful episode. I also got to know, because the Sikh community, I'm Hindu, there's so many different sects in India. I also got to understand the Sikh community and the history, which I didn't really know either, because we all grew up in the States and we all kind of blended in, right? Sikhs, Hindu, Muslims. Like for us, we were all kind of just brown. And so we don't really see ourselves as divided as they do in India. So it was interesting to learn about her community as well, and really understand what was going on from her point of view and what she knew. And so, it just ended up being a real powerful episode, and also helped that she's a good friend. And so,
it must be, again, going back to the, South Asian diaspora and just how so many of us have just so many different perspectives from either, like in this case, someone being in India and knowing what's going on versus being in America. And so it's really cool to be able to build that bridge by sharing the news and what's going on.
Right. And I think, and I'm seeing a lot more of us in my generation really getting engaged in what's going on. Of course, here, America's still our home, but also getting engaged in what's going on in India. Narendra Modi is a very divisive prime minister as well. And so it's been interesting learning more about India. I have a few more episodes about news there and what's been going on. And so it's been a nice blend to do both.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just kind of have, I think, to feel grounded, as well, like knowing what's going on in India in a sense. And so I think that's incredible. And I went ahead and put in the chat for anyone that's watching to be able to check out that episode 42, I believe. And so, thanks, Ami, for being able to.
Really quickly, the other awesome thing about it, because my parents really didn't know what I was doing with podcasting. They're like, what is this stuff she's doing? They've always been confused about my life. But they were very interested in that, and they actually learned about the podcasting world, and so did their friends who immigrated here with them. And so it was kind of cool to share that with them. So
yeah, absolutely. It's like, this is what I do, Mom.
See, I'm useful, I promise.
I'm making something out of myself, I promise.
Yes.
Yeah, trust me. My mom's always like, when are you going to get a permanent job? And I was like, I've been self-employed for a decade. I'm like, I don't know, Mom, just give up. Don't hold your breath.
Asian parents, we can do a whole episode on.
Oh, yeah. We might have to I might have to reach out to you later.
Yes.
Have this conversation. Yeah. But awesome, Ami. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to go ahead and switch over to Vanessa now. Vanessa, you had 2 episodes that you really want to talk about. There's one in particular that stood out to me, and you had a guest on your show, episode 6, talking about what it's like to be Indigenous. How do I describe this? It's about being Indigenous and even dealing with discrimination in her own race. And part of this conversation for you inspired you to really acknowledge your privilege as a first-generation Latina. So any thoughts on that you want to share to our listeners, and even encourage them to go and download and take a listen to?
Yeah, and it was such an awesome, conversation, because as a first generation Latino, like you mentioned, I thought that we were all kind of getting represented in a way, right? Like we're seeing so much representation in our culture. And then speaking to Adelaida, I realized that when a particular movie came out, which was Roma, she saw herself in the cinema, and she was just so elated by that. And I was just floored at the fact that I was sitting back thinking that we're all getting represented, and the Indigenous population, which is there is a large portion of that in Mexico, did not see that. And there is a lot of racism within Mexico as far as the Indigenous population goes. So hearing her story was even amazing to me. And I think that that's the great thing about podcasting, is that you always think you have an idea of what you're discussing, but then you're still learning. You're still, you still have the availability to learn from everybody that you're speaking to. So it was just a beautiful conversation, and it opened my eyes to have this conversation and these topics to be, highlighted.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I definitely can relate to that. Like as a Filipina and being part of the Filipino diaspora, I've come to accept the fact that not all Filipinos get along, and that's okay. We all, there's just different, if anyone knows anything about the Philippines, it's an archipelago. So there's thousands of islands, thousands different dialects, different cultures, different religions. And so, just being able to have that conversation, it's like, just because we share this ethnic background doesn't mean we're going to get along, doesn't mean we're going to, have a lot of things in common. And so I like that you open that dialogue even in your own community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Vanessa. And I want to go ahead and go to Julie Neal now. So Julie, you have, you mentioned this already at the beginning of our conversation, but one of the most favorite episodes that you had done was with Nicole Lee, talking about the growth mindset and being able to use that as a platform for social justice. So can you elaborate on what that is? What is the growth mindset?
Yes. So growth mindset comes from the work of Carol Dweck, who is a Stanford researcher, professor in education. And the idea, it really came out of the context initially in terms of our children and our children's education, and that we want to help them hold the ability that knowledge is not fixed, that they can grow and learn over time, and be okay with failure and trying new things, and not feeling like they have to know everything at the outset. So inviting me to hold a growth mindset in terms of these kinds of conversations when it comes to issues like race or sex or any of the things that might feel more uncomfortable to talk about was really helpful. And she also invited me to help my children hold a growth mindset for those kinds of conversations. That so often, our reaction, if we hear something that our children says that we think is like not appropriate or, uneducated, we might want to say like, shh, don't say that. And she really encouraged us to say like, oh, no, you want to be the person that your children can come to, and you want to create an open dialogue, and you want them to feel like it doesn't have to come out perfectly what they're saying, but that they can be in conversation with you. And another conversation on the podcast where I immediately had to hold a growth mindset that would be amazing to just share a little bit about here is I had the opportunity to interview Sabrina Fulton, Trayvon Martin's mother. And so, in many ways, the death of her son became the start of the Black Lives Matter movement in the country. And she had to move from such a place of grief to really become a voice for a movement. And she ultimately created something called Circle of Mothers, which we got to talk about on the podcast, where she now brings together other mothers who've lost children to gun violence. Many mothers have lost children to police violence, and they can come together and heal and share their stories and figure out how they might take that pain and grief and move it into some kind of purposeful action. And so holding space for a conversation like that is something I don't think I could ever have imagined doing if not holding a growth mindset, because there are no right words. And there were many times where I didn't know what to say, but because I was able to kind of release any idea of perfection and just be present, that conversation was a really transformational one. And if we have time later, I can say that it led to all kinds of impact way beyond the podcast episode, real life impact that's still happening today.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And also creating that space, because I think about myself and my own upbringing. And I don't know, Umi, if you can understand that with me, like how parents are just like, no, just hush, hush. Like, let's not talk about that. I don't know if you experienced that.
Yeah. So one of my things for the podcast is we talk about personal, professional journeys, growing up South Asian, and all the things we could never talk about in front of the aunties and uncles we grew up with. Yeah. Because it was always like under the rug. And so it's just part of the culture. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder if it's because I wonder if a lot of us had become vocal because we weren't necessarily allowed to explore our curiosity early on in life. And so, Julie, I think that's incredible that you're starting, your kids young and allowing them to question things and creating that space to explore, because if you don't answer their questions, then they're going to have a lot of questions, later in life. And so I just think that is absolutely amazing. And definitely to our listeners to be able to check out those episodes, whether it's with Sabrina Fulton or with Nicole Lee. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and transition over to Tamina Watson. So Tamina, you have an episode that came out, I think it was around the time in 2017, where you talked about the Seattle Port. You talked with the Seattle Port Commissioner to discuss the firsthand battle with the Customs and Border Protection officers in the Muslim travel ban that was issued in January 2017. So tell us a little bit more about that episode and what people can expect and why they should listen to it.
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of people, but I think a bit like Julie, I come back to Julie again, those moments that we had between November 2016 and January 2017, I think they were very profound, unprecedentedly so, and we were all affected in some way or another. But what happened for me was that between November and 2016 and January 2017, I was just getting prepared for what is to come. None of us knew what was going to come, but we all knew that it wouldn't be good. And so I was in position, I created a committee for helping people when they would need help, because everybody's going to need an immigration lawyer, whether they are a law policy maker, an organization with members, or just community members. And so when the Muslim ban happened, it happened at 5 p.m. on a Friday, which continued throughout the 4 years. 5 p.m. Fridays became bad news times. Suddenly everybody will remember opening the TV channel that lawyers had gone to every airport they could. But what was interesting is everybody has their own perspective of what happened that evening. And for me, because I had told everybody, I'm here, you're going to need immigration lawyers, come to me, my email and my inbox just blew up. My telephone blew up because everybody needed help. And what people didn't realize is that anybody who was traveling at the time airborne was banned from the US. Anybody who was about to get on a plane was banned from the US. Anybody who just landed, they were banned from the US. And so there were various people around the country who were not allowed to get off the plane. And some of them were actually even if they were allowed to get off the plane, they were turned back on the same plane to go back to their countries. So what happened in Seattle was that there were two people on the tarmac and the airplane was not allowing them to get off. So we had our lawmakers, governor, Congress people, and various advocates go to the airport. And of course, the airport was already full of protesters as well as lawyers. I was on the phone here, just at my desk, just manning, but I managed to get a 360 of what was happening on the ground. So I went to a conference. I spoke to a judge who happened to be sitting next to me, who was telling me his story that, hey, I had a call that day and it was a Saturday. And of course, nobody's around. None of the judges around who's going to sign a stay order. And so he gave me his version. But the port commissioner, and her name is Courtney Gregoire, played a very important part. She had direct communication with the Customs and Border Protection to say, do not let that plane take off. They actually tried to get that plane to take off. So while the advocates were protesting, while the lawyers were writing their briefs, while the lawmakers were really trying to negotiate, she played a very crucial part. And so that episode is one of my favorites because I was seeing it from my perspective, and I heard it from the judge's perspective, and I heard it from some of the lawyers who are also on the podcast in different episodes. Her version is really, really impactful. And so one of the reasons, and everybody here will say, that social impact comes from learning from the things that have happened in the past so that we can really take those lessons into the future. And the next 4 years, in my opinion, is about having grounding blocks, building blocks on what we have accomplished so that whatever comes in the future, we have some of those protections. And these lessons are incredibly important to learn from so that we do not have another ban like that in the next 4 years or whatever, because we're in the 21st century in America, and that shouldn't be happening here.
Yeah, it'd be a problem if we had to repeat a mistake twice, right? We never want to do that. And so I love that you're able to dive into that very deeply in your episode and talk about these building blocks for the future so that we don't, make those same mistakes again.
Yeah. And, I think the last 4 years for America as a whole is a lesson. No matter what your passion item is, we've got to take those lessons and use this time to keep building.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tamina, thank you so much for sharing. And of course, last but not least, I want to go ahead and transition to Allison Sutter. So Allison, we were talking about this on our Zoom call before or offline before getting on here. But I know that's really important for you to amplify that mom caretaking female energy and put that on your podcast. And so with that in mind, is there like a favorite episode that you've done that you want to proudly share with everyone that they should check out, and describe what that episode is about?
Well, I would say the second season, because it's about bringing guests on, but not sharing their bio at the beginning, sharing it at the end, because what I want to do is encourage people to just feel the vibe of the person and get to know who they are sort of as a personality essence, as a person, before we go look at the bio, because the bio can it gets in there and sometimes it can mess with our head and how we connect with the person saying or who the person is. So while they're impressive people, I just want the people to listen. I want it to be a practice in really, truly listening to what a person is saying, but also feel who they are, because part of my work is encouraging people to acknowledge that inner reality, that inner realm. And so I just figured that was a pretty good way to do that, would just be to wait until the end to say, here's what the person has done. And just listen, just be in this space, just be present, take a deep breath, see what you get out of it, and then, and go about your busy day after that. But while you're there in that listening space, just be present with the listener, with myself, and your own space. It's sort of like this trifecta of where you get these three different energy spaces mixed together.
Yeah, I actually really like that style. I have to admit that I'm definitely one that likes to read bios at the beginning. I think it helps me get into the right mindset, but I like that you turn it around and really focus on connecting with the listener. And part of that is getting rid of the titles, right? And really getting to the relatability of the story first, and then saying, oh, by the way, this is what they actually do. So I really like your approach, on your show.
Oh, thanks. Well, it fits with my style, what I'm trying to encourage people to do. So it just worked with, and what I would say to anybody considering podcasting is just go with your intuition, go with your heart. What feels right to you? I mean, I had never seen anybody do this, and there isn't a right or wrong way to do it. That's the amplifications of one's voice, right? It's what does your voice sound like? How do you want to present it? And then roll with it, because it's super fun when you get to do what you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Carla, who is watching. She just said to you, Allison, I love the idea of bios at the end. So I think that's really awesome. I want to go ahead and make sure we use the rest of this conversation to share some major takeaways that you want our listeners and viewers to know. But before I do, I want to take a quick pause and see if anyone wants to unmute themselves and maybe add to something that someone else on this conversation has shared. So any thoughts from anyone? Just feel free to unmute yourself. If not, we will go ahead. We will keep moving forward. Okay, cool. And I don't know why my video keeps going off. I think it's because I keep looking at my notes. But hopefully you guys are okay about that. This is not about me anyway. It's about our guest today. And so let me go ahead and get back to my notes here and make sure we all end on some major key takeaways that we want to share to our viewers and listeners today. And so starting with Ami, let me go ahead and start with you. Let me see here. So you have a lot of things that you want to share. Anything from stop feeling guilty to, focus on the quality of contacts, focus on the quality of listeners as opposed to the quantity, a lot of things. But let me know for our listeners, based on our conversation today, what do you want to share? What's the final message you want to share with our viewers?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to what Allison said, everyone has a voice and everyone has a unique voice. And do not be afraid that it's wrong or right. It's always right if it's your voice and you feel good about it and you feel good about what you want to share. And I think, during this pandemic, we've learned a lot more that what moms can do, and how strong and amazing and awesome we are. And it took me a long time to invest in myself, to really invest in myself, and to really take time to look and figure out what I wanted to do for my own career, for my own path. It was marriage, and then I had 2 kids, and then we were moving around the whole world for my husband's job. And I kept delaying it. And I hit 40, and I don't know if it was the number 40, I don't know what it was, but I was like, you know what, it's my time to figure out what I want to do. Leaned in. It was the best decision I ever made, whether that's investing in yourself time-wise or starting a business or whatever it is. Like, I feel like women feel guilty all the time about something, especially like if it's something to do for yourself. And I'm telling you, it's the best decision I've ever made. I'm a happier mom. My kids are happier. My husband's he's always been supportive. It's always been me and my guilt. So that's the one thing I want to tell all women listening. Just invest in yourself in whatever way that means for you. Don't wait. Just do it now. You're worth it. We need more amplification of women's voices, and I think it's happening, especially in podcasting. And yeah, I just love being a mom, and I think we're awesome. So.
Well, thanks, Ami. I have to kind of add upon just the whole guilt thing, because I think for myself, how much guilt I carry. And I'm not a mom myself. This is probably why I'm the moderator. But I have a lot of what I call mom friends. I have a lot of friends that are moms. But anyway, I remember just kind of expressing even my own guilt to my husband about things, and guilt to maybe hurt his feelings, for example, or to do things in a way that maybe will kind of make him insecure or something, like go out and have a social life without him. And so I'm curious if you have any affirmations that you've told yourself to work through those feelings of guilt, because of course, they say new level, new devil, but I say new level, new guilt, new type of guilt. And so any thoughts or mantras that you tell yourself that might be helpful for our viewers?
Honestly, talk it out. I mean, it was so ridiculous. I mean, when I first started podcasting, I was like, should I really buy that mic, or should I buy like a $50? I mean, just every single thing I was questioning. And when I was actually telling my husband, like, okay, what should I do? He's like, just do it. Like, invest in whatever you need to do. If you're doing it, go all the way. And I was like, oh, that was so much easier than I thought. Like, why am I feeling bad about this? It makes no sense. Where he's like, yeah, of course. Like, if it was a man, they would totally do it. And so I think be open about it, talk about it with your partner, whatever, whoever it is, with yourself. Like, it's just worth it. And no time is better than now, you know? And so, and the other really quick thing I have to say, especially with all of us doing podcasting, is, and I mentioned to you, is be proud of your content and don't worry about followers and social media stuff. Of course, you have to do it, and I get it. But I think if you find those 10, 50, 100 people that support you, that's it. That's your podcast. You just keep going with that and talk to those supporters and see what they want out of it. And don't worry about, you know, the millions and millions of likes that you need to do something. Like, it doesn't matter, you know, just enjoy the ride.
I agree with you, Ami, on that, because, you know, when I think very often we still, as podcasters, compare ourselves to traditional broadcasting and radio, thinking, oh, we need to get all the viewers, all the listeners, like we need to have that kind of mass audience. When in reality, like podcasting is sort of the wild, wild west. Like it's an opportunity to define what success means to you in this type of space. And it's not always going to be the likes. It could be the emails, the feedback you get from your listeners, or even the actual paid members that want to actually be a part of your community. Like there is a different way to measure your success in the podcasting space. And I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. And I do think the main thing that I've learned, and it's been, you know, 53 episodes now, is it's, you know, I've built enough of a platform where I can actually help. I'm interviewing people that don't have a platform for their voices and their stories. And those stories need to be told. So it's cool that I get to do that. I get to help them, you know, tell their story. So that's good for me. That's good.
It's a win-win-win situation for everyone. Awesome. Thanks, Ami, for sharing that. I want to go ahead and transition over to Vanessa now, which I kind of feel like we're all like tied in together. We all share the same, you know, values of amplifying voices. I know for you specifically, Vanessa, and we talked about this at the beginning, really the importance of amplifying the voices of our mothers. And as we talked offline, being able to acknowledge the, you know, the giants that we get to stand on, the shoulders of the giants we get to stand on. So let us know more of those thoughts and anything else you want to share to our viewers today.
Yeah, and it's just the discussion to acknowledge our mother's stories, right? Because those stories are important, and a lot of the time, because these stories come with pain, we don't want to have them revisit those stories. So it's very hard sometimes to just have those discussions. But I think it's very important for us to go back to the origination of those stories so we can better understand them, because as first generation, you know, US born people, a lot of the times we also come with traumas, and they come with the severity of trauma. So it's very important for us to understand what those traumas are, so then we can kind of start dissecting those traumas. And, you know, going back to kind of what Ami was saying, it's just like that guilt, right? So you have that guilt as a mom. Well, then you have that guilt as a first generation, right? Because some of those things that you are seeing in yourself, those, you know, great things that you're doing weren't applied to you necessarily your parents. So you kind of see guilt in those things. And through having these discussions that we're discussing, we are able to start analyzing those things and better understand that you shouldn't feel guilty for those things, right? Mm-hmm. Because you do deserve this space, and you do deserve to be here. And by us discussing what we're going through, we start, you know, kind of overcoming that. And these platform of podcasting has allowed me the opportunity to understand that. And that's the beauty of doing this podcast, is understanding that I am able to talk to a lot of Latinas like myself, and that guilt kind of is starting to melt away, and it's kind of like a therapy session. And then it allows us the opportunity to then go and say, you know what? Yeah, mental health is maybe not a very big thing in our community, and we need to amplify that as well. So taking those steps to, you know, better ourselves emotionally, and, you know, understanding that guilt is there and we just need to fix it. So, you know, overall, I just think that this platform has allowed me the opportunity to do that, and hopefully, you know, be able to go back to our parents and tell them, like, you know what, like, there's some fixing that you need to do. And I know that you don't understand what that is, but let's work on that, because they are giants, like I mentioned, and, you know, we need to help them.
Yeah, no, that really resonates with me, Vanessa, because I think about how guilt and not talking about, like, my immigrant parents and family not talking about sharing their stories as a form of protection, because literally if you spoke out in the Philippines, there's some people that would get killed for that. And so being able to make you feel guilt, like to silence you, to, make you like stay within your lane, in a sense, and be obedient and assimilate, that was actually a form of survival, at least for in the Filipino community. And so I definitely can resonate with that, and saying like, hey, like sometimes you have to also hear other people's stories to figure out your own story, right? Because sometimes, your parents and relatives may not want to share because, like you said, that pain, like when you ask them to share their story, it's almost like asking them to relive their trauma. And so we have to study our history almost around them sometimes to realize like, oh, that's why mom's not sharing this with me. That's why mom is telling me to do certain things and assimilate a certain way, because that's how she's been able to survive. And she's been able to survive with this accent that she's had for so long. And, for me, having that American accent, I can be the voice for her. And so I just really love that you're amplifying the stories of, your immigrant parents, and, continuing this dialogue for all to be able to build that bridge for everyone.
Yeah. And then not just even that, but also just discussing, that it's okay to speak out, right? Because a lot of the times, like you mentioned, my mom came from El Salvador, so it was the fleeing of a civil war. So a lot of those times, those things have to, just be kept quiet. And then coming here to the United States and maybe being the term illegal, you have to be even quieter, and you have to kind of always be looking behind your back. So that's a terrible way to live. But, those traumas are still there. But, it's up to us to then now have the availability and the voice to amplify that.
Yeah. Vanessa, thank you for bringing light to that. I'm going to go ahead and transition over to Julie. So Julie, I know we talked about this early on already, but just kind of how you were able to work past your discomfort to really acknowledge the real harm and fear that mothers of color face. So in addition to that and the growth mindset, is there anything else you want to share to our viewers today?
Yeah, I'm deeply moved by what Ami and Vanessa have been sharing already. So maybe I'll share some things that I was noticing as each of you shared. I just launched season 6 of the podcast in time for Mother's Day, and I interviewed this woman, Anna Malika Tubbs, who's a biographer. She wrote a book called The Three Mothers: How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation. And what was so helpful in that conversation was understanding how mothers, and particularly Black mothers, but mothers in general, are erased from history, despite the fact that those mothers had played such a pivotal role, not only in shaping the civil rights leaders that I mentioned in the title, but also they had tremendous impact in their own communities. And yet there had been almost nothing written about their lives. So really connecting to what Vanessa was saying about the importance of telling these stories about mothers that so often are erased from culture in terms of the impact, and about how we are whole human beings. We are not just the mother in our role, but we also have impact to make that's far beyond just the impact that we make as mothers in our family. So that was one thing I wanted to just keep cheering us all on to telling these stories. It matters, and it's going to change our culture and change the way that our own children understand the role of mothers. Ami, I was moved by you talking about your 40th milestone, because I launched the podcast on my 45th birthday. It was a 45th birthday present to myself.
Woo, that's awesome.
And I call that time.
Never too late. It's another thing.
It's not too late.
Yes.
I call that time in my life my midlife renaissance. It's still happening.
I love it. Yes.
And I just want to encourage people to honor your milestones. Like if you feel that you are going through a transition in your life, to allow yourself to really delve into what that means for you and how you can kind of step into the fullest expression of who you're meant to be during those milestones. So it's one, honor those. And then I also want to just talk about the power of opening our own doors. I think what is so incredible about podcasting, I know some of you have had different backgrounds, but I had zero experience podcasting, no platform, no community when I started. And I just got to the point where I was like, this is what I want to do. And now, because of the way the technology is, I could actually make that happen. And I have been transformed, but I've also really made an impact on other people through the conversations I've been able to have and the impact that those conversations have living off the podcast. So allow yourself to open your own door. Don't feel like you have to wait for permission from someone else. Give yourself permission. And the last thing I'll say is I've had this lifelong goal of writing a book. And my teenage son challenged me in 2020 to do that. And so I learned this lesson about opening our own doors all over again by doing something called a tiny book and self-publishing, and not feeling like I have to wait for an agent or some like advance on a book, but being able to put together all the lessons I've been learning on my podcasting journey into my own book, which is now available.
Awesome.
So open your own door.
You're a self-made podcaster and publisher.
now author.
Oh, author. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me on that. That really resonates with me, Julie, and just talking about like opening your own doors, because the reality is, I think that podcasting is such a hidden gem. Like there really is no gatekeeper to get started. You could literally start for free today. There are free web hosting sites where you could just get started. And so really at the end of the day, the only person that's holding your back is yourself when you know that there's access to this and being able to amplify your voice and really really define what success means for you in podcasting. So Julie, thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to go ahead and move over to Tamina now. So Tamina, I know for you really want to see the narrative on immigration and immigrants change and be a part of that change. So tell us a little bit more about that, being the change that you want to see. Like you are the epitome of being the change that you want to see.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I absolutely want to be part of the change and I want to see the change. And I'll give you an example because it's so fresh. Advocacy takes a lot of time and it has to happen through many different avenues and people. And we're just one of those various people who are trying to make changes. And so on Monday this week, a new an immigration option opened up for immigrant entrepreneurs. I represent a lot of startup founders, international entrepreneurs, and I wrote my first book, The Startup Visa, because I was trying to help them and we didn't have an option for them. So the advocacy started in 2009, which led to my first book, and the second edition is coming out in a few months, in July. But I talked about it on my podcast a lot, and it's all amplifying what is necessary to be heard, not just by the person who is affected but by the person who is actually able to make change. Mm-hmm. And so making sure that everybody in the ecosystem is able to hear you is really, really important. So for all those international entrepreneurs out there, just know I have a bi-weekly column on Above the Law. And so I just published my article yesterday about what that is. And so change is possible and you can change anything that you want to see changed. And so use your voice, like Ami said and Julie said, we all have a voice and use it. It's, in the pandemic alone, us mothers have struggled from, remote schooling, and a lot of mothers haven't even had internet to be able to do that. What is your passion project? Mm-hmm. Use your voice for it, because we are all affected by something or another. So that would be my last message for everybody, that, be the change you want to see.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tamina. And Allison, no pressure, but go ahead and close it out and share with us your final thoughts and takeaways that you want to share with our viewers today.
Sure. I was thinking about it as listening to these amazing women speak, and I realized I have a lot of podcast listening to do because of just this panel alone. But I want to say to those introverts, and maybe introverts with anxiety, that this is a perfect place to find your voice and amplify your voice, because I stand in front of you through this digital world as an example of somebody who has been a lifelong struggle with anxiety, social anxiety in particular, which is difficult, but also an introvert. So podcasting is an excellent place to find your voice, amplify your voice, share your voice, and not have to deal with a lot of the things like the video or like speaking in person that, would be very, very difficult for somebody with anxiety or an introvert in particular. So I think, the viewers can see that there is space for this diversity of voice, this diversity of style, this diversity of however you want to do it. Just go do it, do it and love it and be part of podcasting communities. It's just the wins will outweigh the struggles that you think you are having inside of your head, as you go through this process. So that's where I'll leave my share.
Awesome. And right on time, right on cue, because we are wrapping up this session today. So Vanessa, Julie, Tamina, Ami, Allison, thank you all so much. I'm Jen Amos, just the moderator for the show. We have all of our contact information in the chat. Obviously, you can reach out and check out our bios as well. But with that said, ladies, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for letting me moderate. And to everyone, thank you for watching. And we'll chat with you again soon. See you in the next session.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.